Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. F1's first qualifying session of the year is over and it could be an ominous sign for the rest of the season. George Russell reckons McLaren can already start shifting their development for 2026 given their dominance today, but that does not tell the entire story because last year, the team that was 7th and 8th in the first qualifying of the season went on to win the World Constructors' Championship. Today, that was Ferrari. Rumour has it they've set up their car for tomorrow, but in terms of qualifying performance today, nowhere near where they want to be. So many key storylines to take away from today, including this one on screen right now. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Loads to get into as always. Just arrived in Dallas last night. The time zones here are not exactly ideal for watching this Grand Prix this weekend. So apologies for the late video, but I had to get some sleep last night because it was an absolute mess. Now, let's talk about qualifying and practice before we actually get to that point as well, because this was another unfortunate moment for Behrman. He's had an absolute disaster of a weekend that has so far. From crashing out to then causing another red flag at FP3 to then his gearbox going kaput on him during the start of qualifying. Not an ideal start for most of the rookies. That shouldn't be a massive surprise. Probably the most impressive rookie, Bortoletto, Hadjar certainly up there. We'll get into them over the coming minutes. These are the results of FP3 though. And it was absolutely all to play for, right? Like, I think Red Bull, certainly with Max at the helm, managed to find something to make their car pretty nice. Now, look, when it actually came to pure quality performance, Max maybe, well, he did very well to even get third, and we'll discuss that over the coming minutes here. And the pace differential with the McLarens in the end was pretty mega. But in FP3, it was still all to play for. It wasn't quite as clean of a session for Ferrari. I think this was the first session where we saw Hamilton start to get a bit closer to Leclerc in terms of where he would like to be. I think Hamilton even mentioned he turned up to the track this weekend feeling like he'd made loads of progress and learnings over the last 2 weeks, but realised that when you're actually at a track for a Grand Prix weekends, there are so many settings and things that the team can change that, you know, they weren't necessarily expecting, that Hamilton wasn't necessarily understanding. So again, a really big learning curve for him, of course. Now, McLaren finished out the session. They tried 2 different downforce specs, and they found, which I think is a little bit scary in some respects, but they found the best performance with the most loaded version with a medium level rear wing. That reduces their top speed by about 5 kph, but gave them better performance over the entire lap, even in the dry. And in the wet, that's far preferable to have the extra downforce. So, you know, the fact that McLaren's car maybe works better at, let's say, a medium downforce level is very beneficial, because I've had cars in the past that they're good, but maybe they work better at, you know, low downforce, which does at least mean that their tyres might degrade more because they're going to slide more and not quite have the rear grip. But let's talk about qualifying, right? Because going in, McLaren, of course, were the favourites. Who really knew where Max was going to be? And as I say, unfortunately, Ollie Behrman immediately had a gearbox issue and his day was basically done. But we've got to talk about Liam Lawson, right? Because him getting this drive was controversial, to say the very least. Many, including myself, felt like Yuki Tsunoda deserved the seat more. I understand why they gave it to Lawson, but I didn't necessarily agree with the decision, as did many others. In my opinion, Yuki is a better driver than Lawson, but I understand some of the political factors that went into this decision. The other point was really that they felt like Lawson, from a mentality perspective, was better equipped to deal with this type of situation. But, you know, already you got to think, this is the first weekends. If this happens more frequently going forwards, then good luck, let's just say good luck, maintaining some of that positive attitude, because it was not a good day from at all. Now, of course, he missed FP3 due to like a power unit issue. So again, reliability not ideal for Red Bull right now. And Lawson was on an okay lap, but it wasn't great. I mean, watching his onboard here, he was really struggling. Honestly, in a pretty similar way, I've got to say, to how it was for Perez last year. Like, when you watch Lawson's onboard on this particular lap, you know, lots of overcorrections, sending it into the corner, it wasn't really working for him. And then he looks up into the final corner, technically not the final corner, but you know what I mean, right? The final key braking zone of the lap, goes off the track onto the grass, and that's his lap over. And that's Liam Lawson out of the first part of qualifying of the season. And of course, we also see on the right-hand side the Yuki Tsunoda timings, which ended up being far more spectacular. So yeah, Lawson gone already is a really big deal. And I mean, Lawson commented on it and said, missing FP3 was costly for us. I don't think it's car specific. It's not like this car is way harder to drive. That's why I make mistakes. It's just a tough track, lack of driving, and then being stupid, he says. So, look, it is what it is. It's the first weekends, but immediately there's talk about, well, Max today was 3rd, Lawson was 18th. Welcome back Checo Perez, right? Because typically, at least of the start of maybe a driver pairing, I mean, there was all this talk from Red Bull that, oh, well, no, Lawson's style, it's better for the car than, Checo's was, and therefore Lawson's going to do better. It's the first race. Time will tell. But I'm not really expecting much different, to be fair. I think Max is probably going to absolutely annihilate another teammate, and I'm not sure that Lawson has, the ability to really compete with that, let alone whether his mental can actually hold up, because we know that's a challenge for some drivers in the past. So, qualifying continues, of course. This was a phenomenal performance, I thought, from Bortoleto to out-qualify Hülkenberg, the only rookie to out-qualify their more experienced teammate. And, I mean, look, okay, Ocon and Behrman, bit of a disaster for the Haas boys, really, especially given that for Haas, kind of unclear where they were going to be. There was some hope maybe they would be pretty good, but turns out, this weekend, at least in Australia, maybe it's not been that great for them in the past either. But I think pretty much everyone expected the Saubers to be almost P19, P20. But no, Bortoleto does enough to put it into P15 ahead of Antonelli, which was mega really, because Antonelli was struggling a bit, but it's not like Antonelli's lap was that bad. He just did it a bit earlier. The track was ramping up a little bit. And, he was only 0.6 off Norris's P1 time at the point. But Bortoleto was the same. So it's not like we don't have a competitive grid. I mean, look at these timings on the left-hand side. Absolutely, there's going to be competition between these cars up and down the grid. But when it came to Q3, when it came to crunch time, when it came to really getting to the absolute limit, that's when we saw one team really emerge from the rest. So Antonelli, not the result he would have wanted out in P16. I'm not getting off the Antonelli hype train just yet. I still think he's excellent, and I think he had a pretty damn good weekend, actually, up until this point. We'll see what he can do tomorrow, because tomorrow in the rain, it's almost certainly going to rain. We'll discuss that in a second. Is going to cause some chaos. But Tsunoda, before we even talk about his finish to qualifying, out-qualified Lawson again, this time in a Red Bull. And, I mean, obviously we're going back to last year here, but talking about how he's out-qualified a Red Bull at least in 4 of the last 6 qualifying sessions, he's out-qualified at least one Red Bull. So, again, you might call it a statement today from Tsunoda, and I think that's what it is. But equally, it's not like it matters. Like, they're not going to give him the drive anyway, which is still the frustrating thing. This was Q2. Lewis Hamilton goes around. He was on a decent lap, and then he put a bit too much throttle in on the start of Sector 3, spins it around. And actually, I think it was Jack Doohan who got unlucky, really, as a result of this. He was on a decent lap. Would it have been enough? I don't really know. But Doohan was pretty good, I thought. Now, he's P14. Gasly got into the top 10. So is that good enough? Not necessarily. But still, there are compromising factors in place, such as what we just discussed there with the yellow flag from Hamilton. Doohan ends up P14. Bortoleto was 15th, as maybe expected. Stroll, Alonso, Hadjar. Great lap from Hadjar, but I think, honestly, more so, great performance from Racing Bulls as a team. The car that they've put together at the start of the season has been mighty impressive. And now we have to talk about Williams and Ferrari. If you'd have told me a couple of years ago that Williams and Ferrari would be battling it out, I mean, I wouldn't probably have believed you, first of all. But then equally, I'd have thought, wow, maybe it's a return to the glory days of Williams versus Ferrari for the championships. But of course, that's not how it was. Williams are beefing Ferrari for P6, P7. And what a great lap from Alex Albon. Sainz also made it through to the third part of qualifying as well. Both Williams advancing to Q3 is a mega result for the team. And, what a change, really, from these guys, from what was happening last year with all the repairs they have to do. And the Williams mechanics sleeping very soundly tonight, knowing that they don't have to repair the car overnight, as has been the case for quite some time in the past. But both Williams through into Q3, and I think for Albon, especially good lap to get all the way up to P6, just because there's been a lot of talk about this Albon-Sainz rivalry. How close will the drivers be to each other? Because at the end of the day, as good as Sainz is, Albon is the incumbent, right? In the same way that Hamilton's going into Ferrari and Leclerc is the incumbent driver who knows everything about the team from top to bottom and the car. Albon's in the same position. So, I think it's a fascinating teammate dynamic actually this year. And first blood goes to Alex Albon, but, second blood on some respects goes to Yuki Tsunoda, because a P5 in the Red Bull, B car, just behind really Max Verstappen and George Russell, 13 positions ahead of where Liam Lawson ended up. You can't make much more of a statement on the opening weekend than that. As I said earlier, though, is it really going to matter? Maybe not. But anyway, the bottom line is the McLaren, when it really mattered, again, found a substantial turn of pace. A 1:15.0 was a mega lap time for Norris, and Piastri did a 1:15.1. So 1/10 between the pair of them. If it is going to be a world championship battle between the two McLarens for the title, because right now that's how it might potentially look. Last year, it looked like Max was going to run away with it after the last few rounds, or first few rounds. That's not how it concluded. But of course, this season, if it's not going so well for some of the teams, they will be looking to transition effectiveness to 2026. And, we'll see how the championship goes, right? But it's not like these teams will push tooth and nail to end up winning this year's championship if they feel like McLaren are too far ahead. That is a conversation that we will be having. And again, when it really mattered, when they get the car in the right window, the McLaren is mega, and it's clearly the strongest machine as it stands. But if it is going to be a battle there, the fact that Piastri was only a 10th off, 0.84 is basically a car length pretty much at the speeds that they're going, which is nearly top speed. So it was definitely close, and maybe it gives some optimism if it is going to be a McLaren demolition job this year, that we at least might still have a championship challenge on our hands between the drivers. But I think you can absolutely, as I said before the season, count out Max Verstappen, right? Because today it was, if you want to call it damage limitation, I guess you can, but the fact that he ended up third in the Red Bull, which, was P18 for Lawson, was again impressive. This is what Max tends to do. Russell was right there. Tsunoda then was fifth. Albon was sixth. But of course, the real standouts here in this graphic are the two Ferraris and what happened with them, because they were looking pretty good on the practice day, right? The second practice, they looked right up there, looked like they were going to be in the mix. I made the point for the last couple of days, I feel like Ferrari needed to be good this weekend. It's a track that they should be pretty good at. And even you've got Andreas Stella from McLaren saying that, well, maybe this isn't going to be one of our best circuits. It's like, oh my God, are you serious? Maybe not say that for the sake of the fans. Now, Hamilton wasn't unhappy necessarily about the performance of himself and the car. He felt like he did an okay job, but it's just the car wasn't very quick. And exactly why is a combination, I think, of a couple of different factors. They seemingly figured something out in the morning, which their performance wasn't really there. And Hamilton was pretty much saying how, he felt okay, he wasn't too bad, but it's like, 9 or 8 tenths off is nowhere near, but it's not like Charles was having a great time either. So, a really strange day for Ferrari. I think the bottom line is the car was pretty tricky to drive, and there's also this talk about the wet setup that we'll get to in a second. But in terms of pure performance, for them to be 7th and 8th behind a Williams and behind a Racing Bulls is just, frankly, pretty embarrassing for the Tifosi that were expecting them to be right up there with the McLaren at the start of the season. If you put together the theoretical best laps, if you put together their best sector times, you'll find that it was actually Russell who could have had third, Verstappen who might have been fourth, and then the two Ferraris. So in terms of the fastest sectors, Hamilton actually would have only been, but Hamilton's fastest sectors across sector 1, sector 2, sector 3 would have been enough to be within a gap to Norris, which was actually closer than Verstappen was in the actual lap time. But of course, putting that lap time together for the Ferrari was a challenge because the car was not the easiest, it seems. Now, Leclerc was talking about this as well and says, I'm not satisfied with it. The car was very difficult to drive. But he did go on to say the following, that he said this, I think I know what went wrong, but I have to see the data first. We did the right thing and we had to lose some performance, but it was the right thing to do, but I won't go into details. So he seems to imply that they learned something in the morning that they realised was causing them the performance issues, but then in order to, they couldn't really correct it. And I guess the trade-off was between whether they try and correct it and be reasonable enough in quali, or if they say, okay, we're going to prioritise prioritize a setup focusing on the wet. And that's what was discussed here from De Kesser, that yeah, McLaren, as feared, have the clear advantage over everyone at peak performance. Verstappen was enough to get to third, but yeah, Ferrari compromised settings in favour of tomorrow. You can see it from the data, and Leclerc basically admitted that's what's going on. But still, I mean, you can say, oh, we chose a wet setup and all this, but to be 6, 7, 8 tenths off the McLaren over a short lap of Albert Park, as we know that it is not exactly ideal. So lots to learn, I think. The bottom line is, as I said right at the start of the video, it is very early days. This was qualifying in Bahrain last year. Norris and Piastri were P7, P8 in the McLaren. This year, P7, P8 is Leclerc, Hamilton. And of course, last year, this was the team that went on to win the World Constructors' Championship. But not exactly clear enough this year to say that's what's going to happen now, because it's a very different story this time to what it was last year. And I don't think there's many people that would bet against McLaren winning the Constructors as it stands. The drivers, I still think, is potentially all to play for, given the way that things may shape out. But yeah, what a starting grid we have. The most notable thing probably for me is row 2, which is Verstappen, Russell. Not talked much about Russell, but given Antonelli was P16, good performance from him in the Mercedes to get at least to P4, and he will be starting next to Max Verstappen tomorrow. So, you know, we talked about it before the season, right, about the Verstappen-Russell drama, whether it really is a rivalry or whether Verstappen owns him, like whatever, people have their perspective on it, but they will be doing some on-track fighting this year, and this is set to be one such example. And as Lando says, the car's extremely quick, and when you put it together, it's unbelievable. It's just difficult to put it together. So again, you know, these comments, as even as that this guy says in the replies, I know how much fuel Ferrari had, because the other day, Norris is basically saying, oh yeah, Ferrari are going to be rapid, they were sandbagging in testing, and Norris is still playing it down. He's saying, yeah, the car's unbelievable, but very difficult to get it in the right window. But they obviously achieved that without too much difficulty today. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, George Russell says that it's so good for McLaren that they can just sacrifice this year for 2026 and they're still going to win. Are they going to do that? No. Would that be a good idea? Probably not. It's interesting to think about, though, because I think it was after Australia last year where George Russell said that Red Bull's advantage is so big, you might as well just pack up shop and go home. No one's going to beat them for the next couple of years. That turned around quickly. Do I think it's going to turn around this year? Not necessarily, right? But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. The other big story, though, of the day is on the potential thunderstorm arriving tomorrow. So it's going to rain. There's really no doubt about that. And it seems like the 3 p.m. local time start time potentially could be delayed. So I'm not sure what the plan is going to be here. Rumour has it for now that they're going to keep the start time as is, but there has been talk because sunset is at, I think, 6:30 local time, and it's not like there are lights on the track. It's not designed for that type of racing. So they need to get the race done. It may start later than planned, just because if it rains horrifically, then they may have to do something about it. We know what the FIA are like. But equally, you know, they need to get the race going, right? So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that Verstappen starting third, just behind the two McLarens in that wet condition, you know, it's still absolutely all to play for in the Grand Prix. And we'll see if this talk about Ferrari's, you know, wet settings and wet setup is actually going to be beneficial. But as Hamilton says, I've never driven this car in the rain. I don't even know the settings, so I've got to go and study that one tonight. So many takeaways of the day. I'm going to try, if I remember, to bring back driver of the day and donkey of the day. So I guess let's just about go back to the overall standings and do that now. I think probably driver of the day has to be Tsunoda. I think you can argue it a couple of ways, but really Yuki was the standout performer. And frankly, on the other side, it's probably Lawson, isn't it, to be real? I mean, maybe you could argue Antonelli, but I think today's one is relatively clear-cut and relatively difficult to read if you are Christian Horner and Red Bull right now. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.